Among the many psychological types outlined by Carl Jung, there is one that occupies a unique place, not only for its rarity, but for the psychic complexity it carries. The intuitive introvert. According to Jung, this personality represents one of the most difficult modes to understand, both by others and by oneself. It is not a type oriented towards external action, the world of facts, or observable emotions. On the contrary, it lives connected to a symbolic flow emerging from the unconscious, guided by inner images, premonitions, and archetypal structures that escape common perception. This type does not operate from linear logic or empirical observation. Its compass is internal. It captures meanings that are not yet formed, perceives psychic movements before they become conscious, and is guided by a deep sensitivity to the invisible. The concrete world, with its practical demands and rational codes, often seems trivial or irrelevant to it, not because it is arrogant, but because its attention is directed towards another dimension, a symbolic plane that often anticipates the present. For this type, facts are merely shadows of something more essential that is still in gestation. But this sensitivity, as powerful as it may be, comes at a price. The world around it does not operate on the same frequency. Society demands proof, results, objective data, and what this type perceives is, by its nature, intangible, at least initially. The result is an abyss between what it sees internally and what the world expects from it. Its perceptions are often ridiculed, ignored, or pathologized. Over time, it learns to remain silent, to keep its inner world as a private, impenetrable space. And it is precisely in this silence that the true danger begins. Jung left a clear warning. When this type does not find ways to translate its visions into language, art, or concrete action, it risks being consumed by them. The inner world, which should be a source of revelation, becomes a prison. In this video, we will explore this trajectory in detail. We will understand how this type functions, what its specific dangers are, and above all, what transformative potential it holds when it manages to find a path of integration and expression. In Jung's typological system, intuition is an irrational function, a form of perception that does not rely on logic or sensory experience. For the introverted intuitive, this function takes on a deeply internalized direction. It turns inward to the depths of the unconscious. It captures not what is visible, but what emerges from the more archaic and symbolic layers of the psyche, often without context or immediate explanation. Jung described this as the ability to perceive raw psychic images, symbolic forms that have not yet been transformed into thought or feeling. Their mind operates like an antenna turned inward, picking up signals that have no language but possess psychic energy. This is not mere fantasy, as a skeptical world would have you believe. It is a form of perception. This sensitivity, when integrated, is a powerful source of insight. The introverted intuitive can perceive the deep meaning of events and anticipate changes. However, this same sensitivity makes them vulnerable. As their connection to the present and the body is often underdeveloped, they can easily drift away from objective reality. Intuition then begins to function autonomously, and the individual gets lost in an ocean of internal images. These visions can become seeds of creation, ideas that transform, symbols that heal. But if they are not understood and processed, they accumulate as psychic noise, leading to confusion, paralysis, and the collapse of rational function. The individual begins to live not in the world, but in a kind of self-reinforcing, parallel reality. Understanding this is the first step to not being enslaved by it. But it also demands a warning. No matter how fascinating this internal world may be, it holds traps, especially when vision, without finding expression, begins to transform into delusion. Introverted intuition has a characteristic that makes it simultaneously fascinating and dangerous. It does not operate in the present time. Its nature is directed towards what is to come. This creates a constant conflict between the inner clarity of vision and the lack of external recognition. The introverted intuitive begins to doubt themselves, or else takes refuge in their perception with such absolute conviction that they reject the world around them. In both cases, the tension between the perceived invisible and the denied visible begins to corrode the psyche. The problem arises when these images do not find an external language. At this point, the vision, once revealing, begins to close in on itself. The mind loses the ability to distinguish what is insight from what is illusion, and what was symbolic wisdom becomes solitary delirium. The intuitive introverted type is, by nature, a solitary individual. However, this inner orientation, when it does not find a means of expression, creates a fertile space for delusions of grandeur. Jung called this process inflatio. The moment when the ego is inflated by unconscious contents and begins to identify with powerful archetypes without perceiving its limits. The individual starts to see themselves as a bearer of absolute truths, an unrecognized visionary, a prophet rejected by a blind society. Criticism is interpreted as persecution. Doubt is seen as a sign of others' inferiority. This psychic inflation is dangerous because it dissolves self-criticism. The individual begins to live within their own symbolic narrative, with no clear distinction between archetypal content and concrete reality. They lose contact with their ordinary humanity. The psychic survival of the intuitive introverted type depends on their ability to transform the invisible into form. For Jung, the unexpressed symbol tends to become an autonomous agent within the psyche. The only way to integrate these internal images is by offering them a contour in the external world. Symbolic expression, whether through art, writing, music, or rituals, is not an aesthetic luxury. It is a vital necessity. This process of translating the symbol into the real is what differentiates the creative visionary from the fragmented mystic. When the intuitive type finds a way to externalize their perceptions, they transform their symbolic solitude into communication, their strangeness into language. What was an internal labyrinth becomes a shareable map. This act of creation not only relieves internal psychic tension, but also offers the collective access to contents that were previously only in the unconscious. History is full of figures who operated from this function. Franz Kafka, with his labyrinthine texts, channeled his symbolic alienation into works that still capture the absurdity of modern existence. Vincent van Gogh, unable to adapt to the practical world, poured his symbolic vision into explosive brushstrokes. Even Jung, who recognized this type in himself, wrote his deepest works as attempts to translate complex internal experiences into comprehensible systems. Symbolic expression is the bridge between the inner world and the outer world. When this bridge does not exist, the symbol accumulates and begins to distort the perception of reality. Creativity, then, is not just a gift, it is a process of psychological integration. However, even the richest symbolic expression may not be enough if there is no rooting in the real. The intuitive type, by their structure, tends to neglect the body, routine, and concrete limits. Without an anchor, without a solid foundation in the present, this intuition risks becoming a whirlpool. That is why Jung emphasized the importance of integrating the inferior function, sensation. Sensation is the function responsible for keeping us connected to the now, to the body, to the material world. It perceives what is tangible: the warmth of the sun on the skin, the taste of coffee, the weight of an object in the hands. For the intuitive type, who tends to neglect these perceptions as mundane, sensation seems like a foreign language. But it is precisely this language that provides the antidote to excessive abstraction. It is in the materiality of simple things that this type can find balance, in walking, cooking, tending to plants, or simply maintaining a routine. The return to the body does not deny symbolic depth, it sustains it, when the type manages to alternate between intuitive diving and concrete practice. Their visions cease to be labyrinths and become roots. They become capable of moving between worlds. Everyday rituals assume a therapeutic function. They can be as simple as lighting a candle at dawn or intentionally organizing a workspace. These small acts create an axis in the internal chaos. They are gestures that tell the unconscious, there is order, there is body, there is reality. The integration of sensation is not a limitation. It is what allows intuition to flourish more strongly. Even when the intuitive introverted type develops means of symbolic expression and builds practices of anchoring in reality, they still face a final obstacle: sustaining their own inner truth in a world that systematically rejects the invisible. Modern culture, focused on the concrete and the measurable, values objective results and visible performance. Deep intuitions and symbolic visions are not only ignored, they are often ridiculed or dismissed as irrelevant. This creates a constant tension between fidelity to one's own soul and the need to adapt. At every moment, they face a choice: betray their inner vision to fit in or remain true to themselves, even if it means marginalization and loneliness. This choice presents itself in the details of everyday life. But this tension does not have to lead to resignation. Jung argued that the process of individuation requires exactly this: sustaining the symbolic core of the self amidst the opposing forces of the collective. Living your symbolic truth is not withdrawing from the world, it is navigating through it without losing the internal axis. It is knowing that the vision you carry may never be fully recognized, yet still needs to be lived. Because in the end, the function of intuition is not to please or convince. It is to point to paths that do not yet exist. Living symbolically in a materialistic society is a silent act of resistance. It is choosing depth over appearance, meaning over convenience. This type, when they find the courage to remain true to what they see, becomes a transformative figure, not by imposing themselves on the world, but by revealing with their presence that there is something beyond the surface. If you feel that you belong to this invisible world, if you live among symbols and premonitions that few understand, share in the comments how you have dealt with this crossing. What strategies have you found to remain whole? Your response may illuminate others who live the same silent dilemma. If this message resonated, leave your like so that it reaches more souls navigating the same current. This was Philoverse. Remember, the deepest truths are not seen, but felt.